The vanishing of Katy Horn from Traverse City, Michigan, was far from ordinary. It was the genesis of a perplexing and enigmatic tale. The bewilderment rippled through the peaceful, close-knit community. How could such a thing happen here? Law enforcement grappled with numerous theories. Initially, they considered that the 16-year-old had been swept away by the allure of music, perhaps running off with a traveling band, following her favorite music group on tour. But soon whispers emerged of a darker inclination. Katy's alleged involvement in Satanism and the practice of black magic. The officers pondered a chilling possibility. Could the girl have been a sacrificial offering? But what truly became of Katy? Traverse City, nestled on the shores of Lake Michigan, draws throngs of visitors throughout the year. People come to revel in the vibrant hues of autumn, making it a beloved and sought-after vacation destination. Nestled amidst breathtaking landscapes, this city offers an idyllic setting for both living and working, particularly appealing to those with a deep appreciation for the natural world. As autumn descends, the region transforms into a canvas of vibrant colors, creating a truly enchanting atmosphere. Even the most discerning individuals will find something to captivate their senses here. This place is a veritable culinary capital, promising a delightful gastronomic journey. Traverse City is a place where any pleasure can be found. A hub for entertainment, music, and culture, it offers all the advantages of a larger metropolis. It was to this idyllic spot that Janice Rott relocated with her daughter, Katy Horn, in 1991, following her marriage, eager to begin a new chapter in their lives. In 1994, after settling down, Kathy grew to cherish her newfound home for its tranquility and peaceful atmosphere. She had specifically chosen this town, seeking refuge in its serene embrace. Every day, starting at 3 in the morning, Janice made her way to the nearby bakery, Oven Cupcakes, to start work. They resided in the tourist district near the lake, and Kathy loved spending time there. 16-year-old Katy, when she wasn't in school or soaking up the sun at the beach, could always be found hanging out with her friends from school. Katy had a knack for connecting with people. She was an easy person to like, and she, in turn, loved her friends dearly. Beyond her social life, Katy harbored dreams of a successful future. She aspired to attend university and transform her passion for the natural sciences into a fulfilling and rewarding career. Katy, a girl with a heart full of dreams, harbored a deep love for dolphins and aspired to become a marine biologist. She was just beginning to understand herself as a person, with exciting plans for the future stretching before her. However, fate had other plans. On September 26, 1994, at approximately 3 in the afternoon, Katy's best friend Jen Nazara decided to visit her after school, curious to inquire about her mother's whereabouts. Janice's worry spiked instantly. Kathy was supposed to have spent the weekend at Jen's place. The plan was for her to head to school directly from Jen's on Monday and then finally return home afterward. Janice couldn't understand what was happening. Then Jen confessed the unsettling truth. She hadn't seen Kathy for the past 2 days. After school on Friday, a girl told Janice she drove Katy to the neighboring town of Gaylord. They made a stop in Mansalona to pick up 3 more of Katy's friends. Once in Gaylord, the group headed to their favorite coffee shop. Teenagers often enjoy gathering in places with music and a vibrant atmosphere. Janice mentioned that around 1:30 in the morning, some of their acquaintances expressed their desire to go home. She yearned to linger, to stretch out the moment. This meant they faced a journey back to Traverse City on their own. The instant Janice saw her, he pressed, demanding to know who she'd been with. "We hitched a ride with a guy named David," Jen replied. She didn't know his last name. All he knew was that the man held a few part-time jobs around Gaylord, one of them at a coffee shop. Janice's mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario, a reaction perhaps natural to any parent. Wasting no time, she and Jen rushed in a frenzy to the Traverse City Police Station to file a missing person report. Law enforcement receives hundreds of such reports annually. Even if a 16-year-old teenager goes incommunicado for a while, it doesn't necessarily mean something terrible has happened. But Janice was certain her daughter would never run away from home. While the woman was filing the report, Jenna told the officers who her daughter had been with that Saturday night. David and 3 more friends, Tyler, Carrie, and Jim. She possessed no comprehension of the true value of information. The girl didn't even know their last names. Traverse City was a small town, virtually untouched by the blight of crime. In fact, the town employed only 2 detectives. One of them was Dan Hill. He was the one tasked with tracking down the individuals who had been with Kathy prior to her disappearance. He knew that when dealing with teenagers, there was always a familiar hurdle. They rarely knew the last names, addresses, or any concrete details about their acquaintances. Knowing that every second counted, Kathy's information was immediately entered into the missing persons database. A hotline was also established to gather any potential leads from the public. Detective Hill scrutinized the young woman's bank statements, and the findings sent a chill down his spine. Not a single penny had been withdrawn from her savings account. It was a puzzling detail. Common sense dictates that a person fleeing would take their money, not abandon it to a bank. This peculiar absence of withdrawals only deepened Hill's suspicion that something terrible had befallen her. The evidence suggested foul play, or at least something far more sinister than a voluntary disappearance. The police issued an official bulletin urging the public to share any information regarding the girl's whereabouts. The appeal was widely disseminated through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and television announcements. Various leads trickled in, but many proved to be vague and unsubstantial. A prevailing theory suggested she had eloped with her new boyfriend. Some whispered that she simply didn't want to attend school. A rumor even surfaced claiming she was spotted at an automobile overpass in Anderbelt, 75 miles from town. Such flimsy leads proved impossible to confirm. Investigator Hill ultimately decided to hand the case over to the Michigan State Police, as they possessed greater resources for a thorough investigation. Kevin Day, a seasoned investigator with 15 years on the force, was assigned to the case. 95% of missing persons cases involved individuals running away or leaving with someone voluntarily. However, the fact that the missing girl was only 16 and hadn't returned home to her mother raised a red flag for the officers. While other investigators pursued the lead of a David from a coffee shop, Detective Day focused on interviewing Katty's mother, Janice, hoping to uncover other potential connections in her daughter's life. Janice revealed that Katty had been dating a 20-year-old named Eric Kiston for 6 months, but they had recently broken up. According to the woman, her daughter took him far too seriously. The girl, young and naive, had fallen head over heels, while he was considerably older, a fact that Janice disapproved of from the start. But age wasn't the only thing that bothered the woman about Eric. The truth was, the young man was deeply involved in occult practices. It seemed that Eric and Katy were somehow connected to what some might call black magic. The investigators felt a prickle of unease. Detectives reached out to Eric, requesting an interview at the station, and he readily agreed. In cases like these, the perpetrator is often someone intimately connected to the victim, frequently a spouse or lover, which immediately placed Eric under scrutiny. However, he appeared forthcoming and genuinely worried about Katy's disappearance. When pressed about the reasons for their breakup, Eric explained that they had simply drifted apart. The officers then inquired about the young man's whereabouts at the time of Catherine's disappearance. He stated he had spent the weekend in Grand Rapids with friends, readily providing their names as alibis. Next, the investigators shifted their focus, probing Eric about any connection he might have to the occult. To this, Eric responded that he, like Catherine, practiced magic. He proceeded to describe an initiation ceremony that took place around a large bonfire. Dressed in flowing robes, they chanted in unison, lost in the eerie ritual. Eric spoke of a shadowed tome, hinting at human sacrifices performed during the summer solstice. He coldly rationalized that if the dark ceremony granted power to the cult members, then the act was justified. Further, Eric revealed that a man named Tim Coppett consecrated wine before the group partook from a sacred chalice. He urged the authorities to speak with Tim, convinced that Tim was preparing Katy for something truly significant. Tim was the figurehead, the perceived leader of this unsettling cult. Whispers slithered through Traverse City, Michigan, a growing unease consuming its inhabitants. Could the dark arts, rituals involving human sacrifice, be the reason for Katy's disappearance? Fear took root in the hearts of the townsfolk, as it often does when shadows dance at the edge of understanding. It was usually in sprawling metropolises that young women vanished, swallowed by the anonymity of the urban sprawl. It seemed an unlikely place for misfortune, but the cruel truth is, bad things can happen anywhere, at any time, to anyone. Detectives questioned Katy's ex-boyfriend, Eric Castan, and confirmed he was 3 hours away when she vanished. That distance cleared him as a suspect. But the same couldn't be said for Tim Coppett. Eric claimed that Tim was the leader of the cult they both belonged to, together with Katy. Tim may have held the key to the mystery surrounding the girl's disappearance. Detectives were drawn to him, a focal point where numerous threads of information converged. Their immediate task, however, was to clear those who had been with Katy in the hours leading up to her vanishing. David, along with others who shared that fateful night with Katy, had fallen under suspicion, their every movement now scrutinized. The hunt was on. While the Gelhard police questioned patrons at the cafe, Michigan State Police investigators headed to Traverse City High School, seeking answers from the girl's friends. Sadly, none of them had seen her since Wednesday, and nobody knew where she might have gone. However, the investigators did uncover a significant lead. One of the students revealed that she knew David, a man who occasionally worked at the very same cafe. She mentioned his last name was Chinky. He drove a green van and resided in Gaylord on Huffman Lake Road. Once the police at the station identified David, the investigators headed to the specified address. When they finally met the man at his friend's house, 30-year-old David was taken aback to learn that Katy had disappeared. He agreed to answer all the police officers' questions and revealed that he had seen Katy with 3 other people that night. He was asked to give them a ride. The man claimed he barely knew the girl, having only met her a handful of times at a cafe. He added that around 1 in the morning on Saturday, he agreed to play chauffeur. Everything lined up with what Katy's friend Jen had said. Jen, having just met a guy, didn't want to leave so early, so she arranged for David to drive Katy back to Traverse City and drop off 3 of her acquaintances in Mansalona along the way. He meticulously documented their journey, charting their course as they traveled. He recounted reaching Mansalona, his intention to take Katy onward to Traverse City after dropping off the 3 hitchhikers they had picked up along the way. David explained that he released the trio in a parking area. Shortly after they resumed driving, Katy expressed a desire to join the departing group. He brought the vehicle to a halt, allowed her to exit, and never saw her again. He simply returned to Gaylord. Detective Day had no reason to doubt David's account, but a gash on David's hand sparked suspicion. David explained it away as a mishap with his car's side mirror. When detectives requested permission to search his van, David readily agreed. It was a large, older model van. Day observed the van's less-than-ideal condition, his mind preoccupied with other details. The police officer's concern was confirming the shattered state of the mirror. Indeed, it was broken just as David had described. He had apparently injured his hand accidentally. Despite the van's discovery, Katy was still missing. Detective Day pressed David to retrace the route he had taken while driving the teenagers. The man described the roads he had traveled with his passengers. Subsequently, the investigators requested that he submit to a polygraph examination, to which he agreed. However, before departing, the police directly inquired whether David possessed any knowledge of what had befallen Katy. His response proved utterly shocking to them. A chilling suspicion gripped the man. Dark forces were at play, a sinister brush with the occult. He urged the investigators to seek out Tim, suggesting that the key to unlocking the mystery lay within the intricate web of the sect's members. David was adamant that Tim resided a mere 30 kilometers south, nestled in the town of Waterez, Michigan. Armed with this vital clue, Investigator Day bid farewell to David, leaving behind his calling card. The name Tim Coppett and his description as the cult's leader echoed ominously, surfacing once again in the unfolding narrative of the case. Detective Day found himself compelled to meet this man. One thing was certain. It wasn't just Coppett's sinister reputation that was unsettling, but also the remote road leading to his house, far removed from Chas. On the door, a star was painted, eerily resembling a satanic symbol. As the detectives approached the entrance, they couldn't help but wonder if they were knocking on the lair of a killer. Perhaps this was the very place, the exact spot where something happened to Katy. The door burst open, revealing a scene that sent a jolt of horror through the investigators. 10 days had passed since 16-year-old Katy Horn vanished near Traverse City, her home, on September 24, 1994. The entire town mobilized in the search, especially her frightened friend, Janice. Investigators hoped that Tim Coppett, the alleged leader of a local satanic group Katy may have attended, held the answers they desperately sought. The officers arrived at Tim's secluded cabin nestled deep within the woods, and what they found defied belief. Inside, a collection of long satanic robes of various colors hung ominously. A stuffed crow perched silently in a corner, and bizarre star charts adorned the walls. It immediately became clear to the lead investigator that these items were tools for devilish rituals. Tim confessed to being the leader of the Hawthorne cult, whose followers worshiped the forces of nature. They reportedly revered the cosmos as a unified entity. At the time, he denied any involvement with black magic or Satanism, including human sacrifice and related practices. His answers regarding their activities were notably evasive. This struck the investigators as suspicious. Tim's residence was merely 16 kilometers from the location where Katy was last seen exiting the vehicle. Could he be the one who abducted her to perform a magical ritual? Tim swore he had nothing to do with Katy's disappearance, claiming he last saw her 2 weeks prior. When questioned about his whereabouts on Saturday, September the 24th, he stated that he had spent the entire weekend at home. Subsequently, Tim volunteered to take a polygraph test, which he successfully passed. Following this, he was officially removed from the list of suspects. The following day, investigators caught a break that dramatically shifted the course of their investigation. Detectives in Mansalona were able to piece together the names of those who rode with Kathy on that fateful Saturday night: Tyler Hay, Carrie Britt, and Jim Patters. A thorough check of Britt and Patters revealed nothing of concern. However, Tyler Hay's background sent shockwaves through the police department. 3 years prior, he had pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and served 6 months behind bars. Tyler was either 19 or 20 years of age at the time. He wasn't really occupied with anything meaningful, nor holding any employment. The police were eager to interrogate Tyler, and they made their way to his home in Mansalona. The young man confessed to riding in David's car with his girlfriend, Carrie, Katy, and Jim, on that fateful night. He recounted to the officers how he had offered Katy a place to stay for the night, but she was determined to return to Traverse City. When questioned about her insistence, he claimed she mentioned wanting to attend a grad-folded concert and meet up with friends. Tyler stated they watched the van drive down the road without making any stops. The investigator was puzzled. Had Katy encountered trouble before she could reach her friends? Or was Tyler perhaps being untruthful? The detective then questioned a member of the Sat cult to which Katy belonged, but the individual claimed to have no knowledge of her disappearance. It appeared Tyler had nothing to hide. Nevertheless, the police, wanting to be absolutely certain, requested he undergo a polygraph examination. Tyler passed the test with flying colors. Based on the personal interviews and the polygraph results, Detective Day was certain that he was not involved in Katy's vanishing. That night, Thaler wasn't the only soul accompanying the girl. The following day, the police questioned his girlfriend, Carrie. The story she told echoed what they'd already heard. For the most part, she reiterated Thaler's account, further solidifying their statements. Carrie denied any involvement with Occult or Katy's disappearance and agreed to undergo a polygraph examination. She was gone. Carrie, deeply troubled by Katy's disappearance, recounted everything she knew to the investigators. Only one passenger remained to be questioned: Jim Patterson. He told the detectives the same story as the others. The young man was cooperative and forthcoming during the interrogation. He essentially recounted the same story he'd already shared with Carrie and Tyler. However, Jim introduced a single, seemingly insignificant detail that completely shifted the direction of the investigation. He recalled a snippet of conversation overheard from Katy. It appeared she was scheduled to meet with members of the Rainbow Tribe at 7 in the morning at Traverse Net. But the mention of Rainbow Tribe piqued their curiosity, begging the question of what this group was. These individuals turned out to be avid followers of the band Grade Folded, devotees who chased the group across the country on their tour. Their lifestyle was wild, a blend of casual encounters and illicit substances, a world where a young girl could quickly find herself in harm's way. Katy mentioned they were heading to Grade Folded's Saturday concert. If she had indeed fallen in with this group, investigators would have a straightforward path to track her movements and unearth any secrets she might be hiding. The only thing left was to find them. Jim had given the names of those with whom Katy had planned to meet. The police understood that tracking down this group of free-spirited swingers wouldn't be easy. They moved from place to place, yet they still signaled about their whereabouts. Katy had vanished without a trace just before the concert of her favorite band. Detective Day felt a knot of unease tighten in his gut. The unspoken dread hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew something terrible had befallen her. Driven by this grim certainty, Day pressed on, his determination fueled by the chilling silence surrounding the missing woman. His inquiries led him to Kathy's inner circle. From her closest confidants, he gleaned the names of several members of the Rainbow Tribe, a group Kathy sometimes socialized with, but questioning them yielded nothing. Each member claimed Kathy never arrived at their gathering that fateful Saturday, leaving Day with a growing sense of foreboding and a case shrouded in frustrating ambiguity. The investigators concluded that she never reached the Rainbow Tribe. Although Katy's family desperately clung to hope, they began to fear the worst. Then, after sifting through thousands of tips, the police received another message that sounded like a confession. During the investigation, a message arrived at the police station from a man named Sean Bard. The young man claimed that he was the one who killed Katy Horn. The phone call came in anonymously, leaving investigators grasping at straws. To gather any intel, they headed to the caller's home in Grayling, roughly 40 kilometers south of Gaylord, the very place where Kathy had vanished. However, during questioning, the 17-year-old seemed just as lost and confused as they were. They interrogated him at length, leaving no stone unturned. He vehemently denied all accusations, steadfastly maintaining his innocence. He claimed someone was attempting to frame him in retaliation for a stolen snowmobile. He refused to name the individual, but swore he had never laid a hand on Katy. The officers found themselves at an impasse, the initial call being untraceable, an anonymous whisper in the wind. Following their conversation with the accused, the phone call seemed less like a credible report and more like a baseless accusation. Disheartened, the investigators realized they were no closer to finding her than when they began. The silence was deafening. Katy remained missing, her whereabouts a complete mystery. For the next 18 months, both the local precinct and the state police meticulously followed up on every lead and sighting. Yet the case remained stubbornly cold. Katy had so many people that loved her, she had friends, and her mother was devastated. If she had desired to flee or relocate, she would have undoubtedly contacted someone. But that never occurred. Then, on the 8th of May in 1996, investigators received an invaluable piece of information. A group of people foraging for mushrooms near Hudson Lake Road and Pike School Road stumbled upon articles of clothing. Initially, they dismissed it as nothing, but then they stumbled upon a trinket. The discoveries included a Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirt, undergarments, jeans, and a charm bearing the yin-yang symbol on a leather cord. The clothing was in tatters, barely recognizable. It was only upon closer inspection that they could discern what the items were. The fact that all of this was dumped beneath a tree struck them as peculiar. They reached out to the nearest patrol officer. After examining the clothing, Detective Day cross-referenced the details with Katy's file and confirmed that the garments matched what she was wearing when she disappeared. The police had recovered the clothes, but the young woman was nowhere to be found. A strange mix of emotions washed over Detective Day at that moment. On one hand, his suspicions that she was dead seemed to be confirmed. Otherwise, her clothes wouldn't have been abandoned. The discovery was the missing piece, the one crucial element they needed to reopen the cold case. A search team was immediately dispatched to the location where the clothing had been unearthed. Hopes were high amongst the officers. They truly believed they were on the verge of finding a body, perhaps buried close by, especially as the team began to dig. But their initial optimism proved to be misplaced. Days later, approximately 6 miles to the west of the initial site, a lone mushroom hunter stumbled upon something new. His discovery confirmed the gravest of suspicions. From afar, he'd mistaken it for an enormous mushroom, but it turned out to be a fragment of a skull concealed beneath a heap of branches. He carefully stirred the pile, uncovering more bones. Behind the tangled mess of branches, he unearthed the remains of a skeleton. Investigators meticulously collected the bone fragments and the intact skull, forwarding everything to the forensic anthropologist. Katy Horn was found 6 months after her disappearance, identified through dental records. Regrettably, the coroner couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of death. All that was certain was that death had occurred long ago and was likely violent. The discovery of clothing separate from the body led the expert to believe the young woman had been murdered. It was a grim conclusion. People simply don't wander 6 miles from their clothes to die. Once the remains were identified, detectives faced the somber task of delivering the devastating news to Katy's mother. The news hit her like a tidal wave, a jarring mix of shock and a fragile sense of peace. They had found her daughter. At long last, she could lay Katy to rest. The residents of Traverse City were reeling from the revelation. Katy Horn's remains had been discovered deep within the woods. A shadow of grief fell over northern Michigan. Though Katy was found, her killer remained at large. Despite the discovery and the ensuing investigations, 3 long years passed, the murder of Katy Horn remained elusive. By then, detectives had sifted through layers of misinformation, leaving behind a haunting trail of discarded leads and suspected individuals. The investigation had stalled, with no new leads emerging to shed light on the case. However, in 1999, the case was revived when the story of Katy's murder resurfaced in the local newspaper. Upon reading the article, one individual felt compelled to come forward with information he possessed. In August of 1999, 5 years after Katy Horn's remains were discovered, a local man contacted the police after recognizing the details of the case in the newspaper. The man recalled her because the article included a photograph and recounted the specifics of the incident, appealing to the public to share any relevant information with the police. Paul Offord claimed to have witnessed something peculiar just days after Katy vanished in 1994. He and his wife were enjoying the autumn scenery, leaf peeping along Pike School Road, when he noticed a green van with its rear doors open. Now, a parked van isn't unusual on that road. During that time of year, people often venture into the woods to forage for mushrooms or gather colorful leaves. Through the open doors of a van, a girl was visible, leaning against the interior wall. A short distance away from the road, a man stood with a shovel. The witness later recounted that the girl looked incredibly pale, almost gray, a detail that stuck with him. He told officers the man was digging a hole approximately 5 meters from the edge of the road. The witness didn't recognize the man wielding the shovel, but a chilling thought crept into his mind. The girl inside the van, he suspected, was Katy Horn. Desperate, the pair attempted to call the police on their cell phone, only to be met with the frustrating silence of no signal. Years drifted by, blurring the edges of that forgotten day. Life resumed its usual rhythm, pushing the memory of the encounter to the back of their minds. They returned home, immersed themselves in daily routines, and the intention to call faded, lost in the shuffle of life. Then 5 years later, a newspaper article jolted their memories. Staring back at them from the printed page was a face that seemed hauntingly familiar. A whisper of recognition stirred within them. Could it be the same girl they had seen in the van so long ago? When Paul finally decided to come forward and offer his testimony, he was met with skepticism. The investigator, initially reluctant to believe him, questioned the validity of a memory so distant. Time, after all, had a way of distorting the past. Yet beneath the initial doubt, a flicker of hope ignited. Here, after all this time, was a witness who could place a young Katy inside an old green van on Pike with Cool Route. A glimmer of possibility emerged from the cold case, promising a renewed chance at uncovering the truth. Where her clothes were discovered became a focal point in the investigation. Following this revelation, Paul provided a detailed description of a man he had observed. According to Paul, the man was somewhat short in stature and appeared unkempt. The van he drove was an old, dilapidated model, painted green. Based on this description, law enforcement believed that David Chinky was a strong potential suspect. Compounding their suspicions was the fact that he owned a distinctly aged van. The dilapidated shack was likely the sorriest sight for miles around. But what motive could David possibly have had to kill Katy? Investigators swiftly tracked David down. He was already serving a 5-year sentence in prison for a separate offense. His crime, receiving stolen property. Detective Day journeyed to the state penitentiary, the weight of expectation heavy on his shoulders. The police had already presented David with irrefutable evidence of his guilt, and Day hoped, with a sliver of remaining optimism, that the man would finally crack. During their tense exchange, David exhibited a palpable fear, his nerves frayed and exposed. Yet despite the mounting pressure, he stubbornly clung to his original story, repeating, with a tremor in his voice, that the last time he saw her was when she stepped out of his car. Observing the man's uneasy gaze, Detective Day felt he was finally on the right track. He knew David was somehow involved, and there was still a lot of work to be done. To crack the case, the investigators needed more evidence. They began their search with old police reports and uncovered a few interesting interrogations. During the initial investigation in Gaylord, the police had relied heavily on caffeine. They managed to get a word with one of the vendors. One of the workers revealed that David had been hauling trash from coffee shops and other establishments in his van, and it seemed he had been illegally dumping it near the site where Katy's clothes were found. But it was another worker's testimony that really grabbed the investigators' attention. The fellow recalled seeing the group, Katy and her friends, and that they had left with David. David returned roughly 2 hours later. He quietly settled at a table and drank half a cup of coffee. His subdued demeanor was a stark contrast to his usual self. Unbeknownst to the cafe worker, David concealed a bloodied hand with a napkin. David Chinker's finger cuts were located on the back of his hand. They mirrored the suspicious wounds Detective Day noticed during their initial encounter. The evidence continued to mount. Yet the investigators struggled to pinpoint a motive. That is, until they uncovered the interrogation transcripts of David's neighbor, Margaret Drake. Even before Katy vanished, David had confessed to her about meeting a 16-year-old girl online, making his intentions of wanting a sexual relationship with her quite clear. Margaret also noted that only a few days after Katy's disappearance, David acted strangely. She told the police that David thoroughly cleaned his van and asked her to wash all of his belongings, something he hadn't done in the 2 months he'd been living there. Adding to Paul's testimony, the police believed they had gathered enough circumstantial evidence to arrest David for Katy's murder. On November 26, 2001, David Chinky stood trial, still refusing to confess his guilt. The prosecution built their case almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. In such situations, the key lies in carefully piecing together the available fragments to reveal the truth. Despite the limited evidence, the jury managed to discern the real picture of what had occurred. On November 29, 2001, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found David Chinky guilty of murder. He was sentenced to a prison term ranging from 35 to 52 years. David Chinky never took the stand, leaving a shroud of mystery over the events that transpired after Katy entered his vehicle and before Paul's sighting of her in the same van. Her whereabouts during that time, the destination they reached, the means of her confinement, all remain shrouded in darkness. For the investigators who dedicated 7 long years to the case, the sentencing brought a palpable sense of closure. David Chinky will never kill again. He's been caught. The residents of Traverse City may never fully know what happened to Katy Horn. What they do know is that a vibrant young woman was taken far too soon, and that her mother was never able to come to terms with the loss. The story unfolds, inviting you to delve deeper. It's a tale that lingers, prompting reflection and sparking imagination, hoping to resonate long after the final word. Stay tuned for more chapters in this continuing adventure.